Hello, everyone. I'm extremely glad to welcome you back to the third session of Prep with Pali. Today, we have two speakers with us. Akshaya Jose Devasia is pursuing a master's degree in international security from Sciences Po, and she's currently working as a peer reviewer for the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and South Asia. Archana Atmakuri has completed her master's in International Relations and Affairs from Rajaratnam School of International Studies, and she worked as a research analyst at the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. So, Archana, can you tell us a little bit about your interest in IR?
Thank you so much, firstly, for inviting me to speak here. So my journey with IR began in my undergraduate days when I studied political science and mass communication and journalism. And in my last year, I did international relations fully. And that's when I started to develop an interest in IR. And I thereafter, like, I knew more about IR from a news point of view in terms of following international relations through international politics, like global news and etc. That was like my understanding of IR until I started like pursuing my masters, and I was exposed to an academic side of international relations. And what kind of excited me was like the overlap of social science subjects with IR. And you basically do more of, say, if you're analyzing like different styles of leadership, and you go into like the psychological aspects of it as well. So I mean, these kind of components kind of excited me to study IR further. And yeah, I mean, before I did my master's, my understanding of IR was more from like a news point of view. And after I did my master's, it was more from like an academic point of view.
Well, that's great. Now, Akshaya, what was your process for shortlisting universities, and why did you decide to pursue a degree at Sciences Po?
Hi, Ritika. Thank you for having me here. So there was a couple of factors I think that were very overarching in my search for a school in IR. So I think one thing that I was very clear on is that I don't want to do a master's in the US. And this is various factors. And of course, the cost was a big factor that played into this. And also because I thought that I didn't see the value add from spending that much money. And also because I think looking at my orientation as a researcher, within IR, I've wanted to move away from traditional schools of thought. And these tend to be largely, I guess, Americanized or Western schools of thought. And it was important for me to look at schools outside the mainstream schools of IR. So I looked at Singapore, in fact, I looked at Australia and Europe. And the other sort of deciding factor for me and why I picked Sciences Po is what the orientation of the school is. So Sciences Po itself is based on a very professional orientation. They train most of their students to actually work in the field of IR as opposed to working in academia. And that was just a very different experience. That's not an orientation I've been exposed to before. And something else that was quite an important factor was that I thought, in terms of just funding, France has a lot of scholarships for students, and Sciences Po itself also has a lot of scholarships. So overall, it became a very feasible option, and also because I wanted to sort of expand my understanding of international relations through European political thought.
All right, that's great. Both Archana and Akshaya, in that order, what were your undergraduate GPs like, and how important is GPA?
So like, I really don't remember my GPA. That was long ago when I graduated. But I would say GPA is important, and at the same time not that important. And I say this for a couple of reasons. One, if you're applying for like a master's program, and if it's it depends, right? Like if the requirement is that the GPA needs to be high, then you should like have a good GPA. But if you don't, like, say my GPA, I was not among like the top 5 or the bottom 5 as well. So I was like a little over average. But I had like a lot of internships and things to substantiate my application. So I think in that case, like, you're having like an above average GPA still is all right. So you can still figure out, how to get to the place where you want to be. I mean, not GPAs are not the only thing that will lead you to say, or like land you in your dream job, for example. I mean, when I was interviewed, GPA was taken into consideration, but they also looked at my writing skills, analytical skills, different skills that are also important for the role. But whereas I think college applications, if you take that into consideration, they would probably give more weightage to your GPAs. So it depends really. But then I think you should strive to have a good GPA. I'm not saying that you should not have a good GPA, but then I'm saying that even if you don't manage to get a good GPA, you should still be able to tell or like show that you're a good candidate and you are interested in the field. So I think that's the takeaway.
I really agree with Archana on that. I think at the baseline of it, a GPA is just a threshold, but it is an important threshold. And I would say this because, as Archana said, it really depends on where you want to go. Certain schools are very, very stringent about, the GPAs and having a certain academic level. And especially like, because I want to get into academia and do a PhD at some point. And for me, and for people who want to pursue this academic track, you need to be in the top, I think 10% of your class, simply because it's an indication of your engagement with your coursework. And that's just it. That's just because that's the sort of, I guess, professional path that you want to take. But I think what's really important, and especially when you apply to graduate schools, with or without the highest GPA, is really framing your story. Because at the end of the day, some people have good GPAs, some people have important internships and research, and there's no bad story. It's just about how you position yourself and your academic journey so far and your professional journey and how you would contribute to that school. So I think a GPA is important, but there's always ways to work around it. And that does not have to be the all encompassing sort of identity that you present.
Thank you for that. Now, Akshay, can you tell us a little bit about how we can draft an academic CV and what are the most crucial components?
So I think something that really helped me is if you go online at Harvard and Princeton, they have a lot of really good templates for just looking at academic CVs. But something that I sort of picked up along the way, writing and rewriting my academic CVs, is just sort of understanding who I am as an academic researcher. And this builds up from multiple components. This builds up from your own coursework. This builds up from the research that you've done, the internships that you've done. But ideally, and this brings me back to my original point about writing a story, is that within every framework, because CVs, SOPs, you're just presenting yourself. And when you have a clear idea of, so I've done this coursework, I've done internships in this area. So when I'm reading through this all, I'm trying to also tell you that these are my interests. This is how I've developed and built my interests so far. And this is how I'm going to contribute to your organization, to your college. And I think that's a really important aspect of positioning yourself. So something that I have found to be extremely helpful, especially when applying to academic organizations, is one, you need to be very clear about what stream of research that you want and that you're interested to work in, and really shift and amend your CV to fit that role. Like I have, I think, at least 9 or 10 CVs, and they're not too different. They're just highlighting different aspects of me as a researcher and different aspects of my own interest. Because the person who's probably reading is going through 100 CVs, right? But and you probably can't just do enough to fit through every organization. But I think what's on you is sort of finding the fit between you and that organization and highlighting just that connectivity.
Right. Okay. Both Archana and Akshaya, in that order, how did you go about writing a statement of purpose? Can you offer some tips to our audience?
Yeah, I mean, Akshaya is on point when she said you have to kind of position yourself in a good fashion. So, I mean, yeah, that it's a very important skill that I think a lot of people take it for granted. They just assume that, yeah, it's just easy to show my credentials in a piece of paper. But then it takes a lot more than that. It's the art of storytelling, I would say, where you bring in all the aspects of your interests, etc., into one document, so that you will have a better idea and understanding of what do you actually want to highlight? So, I mean, without this larger, like broader picture of what you actually do and what your interests are, I don't think you will be able to figure out, like, or rather highlight the important aspects that would fit into your application process. So, I mean, having this master document is always like essential, even if you are doing your CVs and SOPs. My SOP journey was, again, like I just dumped some information and I was like, just thinking, yeah, this is my SOP, this is how it's done. But then I got it reviewed by my sister-in-law, and she, reviewed it. She like helped me with a great draft. And I think the key again here is to have more eyeballs run through it. The more eyeballs, the better, because people will look at you. I mean, they will have a different perspective than you do. Sometimes you might miss out on some things, and they might pick it up. So it's always helpful to run it through a few people before you send it out.
Yeah, I think I really agree with that. I think one of the most important things is to just, once you write it, send it out to people, have people read through it. Especially, something that I don't know whether a lot of people know is, but when you reach out to seniors from schools that you wanted to apply to, people are generally very receptive. I've, read a lot of SOPs. My seniors have read my SOPs. So don't ever feel awkward or weird about reaching out to people who've already been in that school. More than often, they'll be very happy to help you. Something that actually I think might be interesting for those of you who are not very clear about your research interests. So when I applied to grad school, I mean, I knew I wanted to work in IR, but unfortunately didn't have like an overarching theme or a larger idea. So what I did is I focused very strongly on what I have done so far. And how through every internship, through every research opportunity, I've really tried to explore a new frontier and I mean, for myself, and what I've learned from it and what my takeaways are. And that was sort of my positioning. So a lot of, because I didn't know what I want to do, the whole idea was what I have done and how I've made use of every opportunity I've had. And I think something else that's quite important, especially when you're applying to top schools, is really explaining to them why these schools in particular. I think generic SOPs really don't work because they're getting hundreds of thousands of applications. And it's really important to read up about the schools that you're applying to, read up about the professors, read up about the programs, read up about what specifically is that school offering you that you're interested in, and position yourself through a very specific, clear lens. Even if it's just the last paragraph of every SOP you're changing, I think that's an important detail to pay attention to.
Right. Okay. Archana, how was your role as a research analyst in ISAS? Could you speak a little bit about the nuances of research in IR?
Yeah, so the Institute of South Asian Studies focuses on South Asia as a region, and they kind of look at contemporary research more than the historical aspects to it. And South Asia is studied from like an international relations, political economy, technology, domestic politics, and diaspora angles. These are the areas that they largely work on. And of course, like I was more interested to do international relations, and then like I fundamentally studied the foreign policies of countries in the region, and I also studied like India's foreign policy in the neighborhood, and I was also interested in like China's interactions in the region. So essentially, I studied these. I mainly worked on these topics, and I was also interested in media and politics because I have a journalism background, and I was kind of researching on how social media is used by different countries. I did some research on Myanmar, and which, although it's not South Asia, I was in Singapore, so I studied that region also a bit, and Southeast Asia's interaction with South Asia. So these are very broad topics that I've worked on. If I have to talk about nuances in IR, there are multiple levels of nuances. I think firstly, broadly, we can look at the academic side of things, where we use like theories to analyze a lot of things that are happening in the current world. And then there's like the policy side of it, to assess if this policy is right, or fundamentally, like, analyze the policy in a much deeper fashion without the theories. And then if you go one level deeper, what Akshaya has mentioned, that there's, again, in IR, there's like a very Western centric, theories or ideas. And then if you study from an Asian university, then you hear a lot of like Asian perspective that is much more upcoming as well. And you don't generally stick to the ideas of the Western school of thought only. So again, like if you take that level, then it's more of like the Western versus the Asian, or like, other region for that matter. So I think like broadly, this is the understanding for me. I don't know, Akshay, if you had anything to add here, then I'd be happy to hear.
No, I mean, I think what you said, I think is really important to have a very open mind, because
Yeah.
before I was very, I know South Asia and I'm just going to focus on South Asia. But then
Yeah.
I think all of IR is just sort of expanding your focus. And it's interesting because we do come from a South Asian background, but we can bring so much to non-South Asian perspectives.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Even if we do IR of South Asia, we still invariably like have to bring in other powers in the region, say, even if it's like China or European countries, which are engaging with South Asia much more now. So I think, it's a vast subject. Like if you're interested, then, it's never ending. You can just dive deep.
yeah.
Right. That's great to hear. Now, Akshaya, you have received the Chapak Masters AME Scholarship. So in this regard, what attributes of your profile do you think were most important?
I want to put it nicely, but I think something when it comes to scholarships, unfortunately, a very, very decisive factor is grades. Because when it comes to scholarships, at least the threshold is that you have very high grades, simply because everybody that's applying is applying with high grades. That being said, so that's one way to work off it. But then I also think it's important, and this is what we've been speaking about so far, about positioning yourself in these applications. And I think it's really important to exemplify or to highlight how you've used the opportunities that you have had in the past. And simply because that's just an indication of how, with getting this kind of funding, you will properly use this money going into the future. How you whichever school that you've come from, whatever you've done so far, how you've made the best out of everything that you've had, and how that really is an indication of how much of an asset you will be, because ultimately scholarship is somebody putting money to fund you, and you need to sort of prove to them why, how you're going to contribute back to them. And something, and this I think can really work to our advantage working in the field of IR, because a lot of what you don't work in IR to necessarily always go into the private sector. You work in IR because you're interested in contributing to a larger goal, a larger framework. And I think you can really highlight how you want to contribute back to the organization, contribute back to society, whether it's through research or whether through working, because I think the fundamentals of working in a field like IR is doing something more. And so I think already when you're coming in this field, you have a very distinct advantage. I think something else that's rather important, and I unfortunately made this mistake, is starting at least 1 year like before, to understand what kind of scholarships are there, to understand who give these scholarships, and to understand deadlines, because I missed almost all deadlines. And it's important because a lot of, especially in France and Europe, scholarships are really paced out, and you can miss a lot of deadlines according to which cycles that you apply in. It's also integral to understand who is giving these scholarships and what the purpose of these scholarships are, in order to sort of tailor your own position, to tailor your CV, SOP to fit better in line with the missions of these scholarships. But I think ultimately, good grades would be a very good starting point. But as Archana said, it's really important to highlight yourself, and highlight your own journey, because nobody is going to have that journey, and you can explain it really well, and put your best foot forward, but be very very cognizant of the deadlines, be cognizant of sort of who is giving what, and be prepared, just be very prepared.
Right. Thank you for that. Now, Archana, you have several publications to your name. Does this add value to one's admission profile? And at the same time, many students face the imposter syndrome. How can they overcome this and start writing for various forums, newspapers, and journals?
Okay, so my publications have started coming in only after I started work at ISAS. Prior to that, I have written a couple of newspaper articles, but they have those were nothing to do with IR. So yeah, I mean, publications are obviously going to add value to your application process, or even your it's going to obviously add like weightage to your application. However, like even if you have say internships, because not all masters, not everybody will have publications when they reach their master's program, and when they're trying to apply for their master's program. So I think you will start like writing a lot more in the academia once you're a little more experienced. I mean, I think it's much more easier to write for newspapers, not like as a freelancer, but if you're part of like an organization, that's a starting step as well. So yeah, I mean, ultimately it's going to add a lot of value to your application process. I do not know about Western universities, or even European universities for that matter. But Singapore particularly would ask like a writing sample. I mean, like an unpublished writing sample. So a lot of universities do ask for your writing samples. And of course, like an unpublished ones as well. So, ultimately, if you have publications or you don't have, you'll still end up writing like a sample for the university application process. So essentially, even if you don't have them, it's fine to start with, but if you have them, it's great. Speaking of like imposter syndrome, I myself like struggle and face this a lot of times in my career, and I think like a lot of people do, not just me. So people who are in this field tend to have tend to question themselves now and then about their abilities. So there is so much of research on this and how to overcome this online. And of course, I think it's a trial and error to see what works for you and what doesn't. Personally, I do two things. I sit down and I observe that feeling, and then I tell myself that there are going to be people who are always better than you, and there are also people who are still learning. So if you look at like everybody around you, you should tell yourself that, look, it's part of the learning process, and there are always going to be people better than me, and there are people still learning. So it's fine. Like even if you are giving like your paper for review and somebody's like thrashing that paper, and you start questioning yourself like, why am I even here? Why do I have to go through this? It's fine. It's just a part of the process. And a lot of seniors also go through it. It's not like only the juniors or the people who are starting off in their career have to go through this. So yeah, I mean, that's one thing. And the second thing is I observe, and I always like speak to people around me, and I always have a habit of like journaling the kind of work I do, so that like if I am sinking in that feeling, I look back, I open that journal, and I see like how far I've come from the last time I felt like questioning my credentials. So it just like makes me feel better, and I think like it works for me. So it's just a trial and error to see what works for you and what doesn't. But these are the two things that I try. I don't know if there are better things out there, but it works very well for me. So how do you overcome that and start writing? So there are a couple of ways to do this. One is you start writing, obviously, and send it out to publications. It's not that easy. It's not that simple. I mean, it's not like you just send it out there and it is going to get published the next second. It's a huge process again. If you're like just a graduate student who is trying to write, I think there are a couple of ways to do this, but it's a great practice even if you want to go into academia. One is you approach your professors, okay, and then you tell them that, look, I'm interested in this subject genuinely, and ask them for help. Like Akshaya has mentioned, a lot of people are very receptive to these kind of proactiveness, right? They will respond and tell you that, look, okay, I'm going to help you review your paper. Always, if you get it reviewed, you'll have a better chance of getting published. So it's important to, again, just like the SOP, you have to review your papers. That is a very important step to get published. And as part of the process, you will also learn that your ideas, you know where your ideas stand. So approaching your professors, approaching your seniors, this is always going to be helpful. The other thing that I usually do, and my mentor has taught me, is to collaborate and work. This is a great exercise. We underestimate it. But if you collaborate and work, you will know the other person's way of writing, way of thinking, way of researching. Everybody in research, you will eventually realize that they have their own style of researching, they have their own style of thinking, even to like a small matter of organizing all your resources in a document, organizing the structure of the paper and things like that, even if it's like 1,000 words, right? So you will learn all these things from a lot of people that you collaborated with, and then you'll ultimately like have a structure after which you can start publishing by yourself. So for starters, I think it's a great way to get published. You collaborate, you get like insights from seniors, professors, etc., and that's the way to do it, is what I feel.
Right. Okay. So one last question for today. Akshaya, can you tell us a little bit about how you secured an internship with the United Nations?
So with the UN, there's a bunch of procedures that you have to go through. It can be very, very tedious, very, very extremely bureaucratic, takes a very long time. But I think the first sort of set of parameters that people need to understand is that most organizations within the UN are unpaid. So there's very few, like for instance, the World Food Program where I'm going to work. Then there's UNICEF. There's a couple of organizations that pay you. So it's very important to know that distinction, because a lot of these internships are based within Geneva, within extremely expensive countries, that really limits sort of the opportunities. It's also important so the UN has a roster and they have internships all year round. Something that I found extremely useful in my experience about applying, because I applied to, I think, at least 14 internships within the UN. I got a call back only for 2, and that's a very, very normal number. It's easy to get discouraged, and it's you'll probably not even get feedback a lot of the time, because just that's the amount of applications that they're getting. I think it's important to just keep going. At the end of the day, understand why you want to apply to the UN. I mean, it's a good organization, but it's also because you truly believe in its goals. And if you're willing to do that, then you need to keep, you need to be willing to really test your own limits, in the sense that it's not easy to get 14, 15 rejections and then keep saying, oh, I'm going to keep applying. It's also very, very useful, I found, to reach out to other people who have interned at the UN, peer reviewing, what Archana was saying, have them look at your CV, look at your SOP, wonder what's going wrong. I think something that really struck out to me is somebody, told me very nicely, I'm sure you've done a lot in your life, but then if you write 3 paragraphs, nobody's going to read it. Like, 1 paragraph SOP is really the most important part of applying to the UN. Really quickly, so it's important to pick out the organizations that you want to work in. Also reach out to the heads of these organizations. It's really helpful to have that one-on-one connection. Especially, you can reach out to LinkedIn. People are extremely willing to help all the time. And position yourself in the sense that what exactly is the position that you're applying to. You also see keywords. I think it's important to highlight how your skills and how your experiences directly and very, very directly correspond to what they're looking for. That could involve using the keywords that they mentioned, could also involve sort of skirting around the keywords to be less obvious. But the point is that with internships like this, simply because of the number of people that apply, you want to put in your eggs in every basket possible, and a lot of that is just really being very direct and overt with what you can do, with what you want to do, and how you bring value to an organization like the UN. And most important part is, don't get discouraged and talk to people. People are always willing to help, and just keep applying.
Right. Thank you so much, Archana and Akshay, for joining us today. And to everyone who's watching, I'm sure you got a lot of insights from the session. And do comment below. Tell us what are the sessions you look forward to, and we'll try our best to arrange those sessions.